Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar for tonight. My name's Jessica. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm really excited to introduce to you Dr. Shukla. He's an assistant professor of radiology, currently practicing interventional radiology at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School. He did his radiology residency at Mount Sinai, Beth Israel, where he started a company for Yay Medical Innovations. And his company is really focused on improving medical device products and getting them through the prototyping, patenting, and licensing phases. So he has successfully been able to sell a product through his company and is currently actively working on other products in his portfolio as well. And so he's going to be giving us a talk about kind of just that. How do you take an idea and commercialize it? So without further ado, Dr. Shukla, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Jessica. Hi, everybody. Like Jessica said, I'm Pratik Shukla. I'm an assistant professor at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School. And I'm going to give you a little sort of rundown on how to take an idea from pretty much the concept to on the shelf in the room and at being displayed at SIR this year. I'll try to keep it pretty general, but I'll definitely give some specifics about my story because my story is pretty unique compared to most people that enter the device development realm. I know you guys had a talk a couple of weeks ago, really dwelling into the unmet needs. So I'm gonna kind of briefly just go over that again, but I'm not gonna dwell into it as much, and I'm gonna focus on after you actually have the idea, how do you get it to the market? These are my disclosures. Of course, everybody on this webinar knows interventional radiology is a new and upcoming specialty in the sense that we are now a primary clinical specialty, separate from diagnostic radiology, although still pretty close with the new residency program. We've always been a problem-solving specialty where a lot of the innovations in interventional radiology arose in a clinical setting where someone couldn't do something. New problems, treatments, and techniques evolved and naturally led to the formation of new devices. So interventional radiology is really at the forefront of technology, and that's sort of how I got into this device development space. You can't talk about device development in interventional radiology or the endovascular world without mentioning the two pioneers. Of course, on the left of your screen is Charles Dotter, the father of interventional radiology. And all of you may know him, but a lot of people don't know the gentleman on the right, who is Bill Cook, who was the founder, CEO, and chairman for a long time of Cook Medical. And these two guys actually got together at an RSNA meeting and talked a lot of shop, came up with a lot of different catheters and wires to do different things. And these guys are really the fathers of minimally invasive technology that we use today. If you try to look at books or online at different databases and you Google medical device development, you're going to see charts like this, figures that talk about phase 1 through 5 with all these little fancy terms and colors. This is not what I'm going into today. This is not for beginners or for people who are starting to dip their feet into device development. This is for the big companies, the publicly traded billion-dollar revenue companies that sort of follow this model. So anyone starting out and anyone interested in medical device, I would say stay away from things like this. But I am going to plug some resources during this talk. This is an excellent, excellent, excellent book entitled Biodesign. If anyone is really interested in biodesign, there are two excellent fellowships. The one that this book comes out of is from Stanford. The Stanford Biodesign Group, probably the most prominent biodesign group in the country. The second one I would say is Emory. But this is a book that I read cover to cover when I was applying for fellowship because I was really interested in medical devices. So I would say if you are interested in medical devices and want to learn more about the process, dwell deeper into it than what I go into today, I would definitely buy this book. This is sort of an outline of what I'm going to talk about today. Like I said, the idea formulation, we're going to go into just a little bit because you guys have already had a talk on how to come up with an idea and define an unmet need. But the rest of these things is what I'm going to dwell into a little bit in more detail, such as the patent search review, writing a patent, prototyping, market research, and then finally taking it to the big guys, the big companies for licensing and getting the product on the market. This is from the Biodesign book, the 3 I's of medical device. I think this is a very, very good outline of how me and my friends approached it. For us, it was a little bit more serendipity, but when we play Monday morning quarterback, we do realize that this is sort of the way we went about things, where we identified the problem first, figured out how to solve the problem, then invented a solution, and then we implemented a strategy to get it out there, get a licensing deal with a big medical device company and get it on the shelf. So briefly, whenever I think of ideas, I think of 2 ways an idea can come about. I think most of us, most physicians and startup companies sort of go the organic route where you have an aha moment. For example, I know that when I was a medical student and a resident, a lot of the organic aha moments were during a procedure or during a case when an attending would say, well, I wish there was a way to do this, or I wish someone would make a device that would do this. And that's sort of how we kind of came up with our first and second, third, fourth, and fifth products. And I think that's how physicians really come about their ideas and get into the medical device space. The other way, which also works, is called the forced idea, where you actively brainstorm 100, 200 problems or 100, 200 devices, and then a board sits together, figures out which one is the easiest to solve or the most critical to solve, most revenue, most research, what their company can solve the best. So this is what medical device companies do. This is what Boston Scientific and those guys are doing. They're also speaking to doctors who have the organic ideas, but to continue innovation in their companies, to the products that they have, and to other products that they're trying to develop, they really have to go through this forced problem list method to develop ideas, and they have the resources and revenue to do that. But again, like I said, physicians don't sort of take this route. The unmet need, I know you already had to talk about this, but I mean, if there is one slide that's the most important slide in my talk, and the Biodesign textbook that I referenced actually has a whole chapter dedicated to the unmet need. So I would say this is the most important slide. And the unmet need is really defining the problem or the device that needs to exist. So the first thing you ask yourself when you do identify a problem or you can't answer a question is, well, is this really a problem? Am I identifying something that's very isolated, or is this a common theme? Have other people noticed a similar problem like this? And has there been attempts to address this problem? Does a solution already exist? Is my idea obvious? Has something been patented to fix this problem? Has my idea been patented to fix this problem? And if so, why did this solution not make it to the market? So the first thing you have to do when you come up with an idea is you have to do a patent search. This is a very extensive process. You can pay a lawyer to do this because lawyers have access to databases that are provided by the government. Access to those databases cost a lot of money, so the lawyers will charge you an arm and a leg to do a patent search, but we're lucky to be living in 2019, and we have Google Patents. Approximately 98% of all patents are on Google Patents, and it's a very searchable database. But it does get pretty tricky. So I'm going to use an example here. So let's say you have an idea for an IVC filter. You've identified, they're hard to take out, they perforate the cava, and you have some idea of a way to fix that problem. Well, how do you know your solution and your problem has not been addressed? You go to Google Patents and you search IVC filter. You search IVC filter, you're going to get, this has 10 pages, so probably 300 to 400 patents, and all the patents that reference the term IVC filter. After that, you sort of find a patent that is kind of like the idea that you're proposing, or something that's along the lines of the solution that you have in mind. But as you can see here, there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of figures referenced, a lot of the terminology is it's a lot of gibberish, a lot of lawyer work. It's very specific but very broad at the same time. Whenever there's a patent that's filed, this is called a utility patent. These are written by professionals and are written to be very protective of the technology, and thus can be very hard for me and you and physicians to really interpret what they mean. Furthermore, like I said, there's a lot of figures that are referenced, a lot of fancy pictures in one patent, and these are just half the figures that I can get to fit on the slide. And you can see that figure 8 towards the right has, item number 252, 254. So even a small device such as an IVC filter, which you can't imagine can have 256 different parts, does have 256 different parts, and it's very, very detailed. So patent understanding patents can be very difficult because the figures are very, very difficult, and also generating your idea can be very difficult because these drawings are all done on CAD, done to scale, and have multiple pages of literature in the patent that actually describe the devices. So what do? You don't want to pay a lawyer, thousands of dollars, but you have an idea. So this is my second plug of the talk, is this book called Patent It Yourself. This one's a little bit harder to get through, but we're going to talk about the two different types of patents. And to get through the first provisional patent, I mean, this book is a very, very, very good resource. This is the book that I personally used to write my first provisional patent. Your provisional patent that language will probably not go into the utility patent if you do go through the way that I did with licensing your technology through a medical device company. If you do decide to hire a lawyer and you want to take it to manufacturing yourself, something that me, you, and doctors typically don't do, then I would say, go the hiring a lawyer from the beginning route. If not, buy this book. It's an awesome book, and will tell you how to phrase different words, how to really draw figures, how specific to get, how general to remain. But with that said, this is just like a 101 book. So the provisional patent. This is something that you, me, and again, physicians can file ourselves. It is very hard. Like I said, that book is pretty difficult to get through, but if you do spend time reading that book and reading a lot of patents that are similar to your idea, for example, you have an IVC filter idea, so you go through a bunch of filter patents and read them and see how they're referencing other patents, you can yourself file a provisional patent. The provisional patent, though, holds your place for 1 year. So what happens is you have an idea. Of course, you don't have the resources right now at this moment to act on the idea, but you want to protect your idea. So how do you protect your idea? You file this provisional patent. You file it with the patent office. It costs a little bit, just under $200. So it's something that most people can do, but it does have to be very thorough. So I can't stress the importance of really reading through a lot of patents and buying that book and really trying to write the provisional in language that relates to patent terminology. The other reason you have to be very, very thorough is when you do convert the provisional patent to the utility patent, which you have to actually file within 1 year of the provisional patent, you can't really add much more information to the provisional patent. Can you make it more specific? You can. You can't really make it more general, but it has to be pretty similar to the provisional patent. The thing you can do is you can add a lot of figures. Figure parts can change. You can become more specific. But if you introduce a new idea or a new technology, your idea, you pretty much have to file a provisional patent again with the increasing details. And that's what actually happened to us when we took our provisional patent to a medical device company, and they actually refiled a provisional using a lot of our language, but just making sure that everything we had, every additional idea or every specific idea that we want to protect was protected. The utility patent can be pretty expensive. To file can cost you up to $10,000, but lawyers will really take you to $50,000. And I'll talk to you later about the different level of deals that you can get with medical device companies, and you may not need a utility patent like most people and most lawyers will convince you to get. Prototypes. So what I would say is actually this phase should actually come before the patent writing phase. When you talk about medical device development, though, patent writing typically at the level of the medical device companies comes before the prototyping. But when you're at our stage, I think once you develop a prototype that works, then you can start drawing figures and labeling figures and writing the language describing the idea you came up with. Also, just to plug, all the figures that we used in my patent were done by a biomedical engineer that we involved in my company, who's a good friend of mine. Very good with CAD, very good with scaling to drawing to scale. So that's something that we didn't do ourselves. The Biodesign book says, you know, the pictures don't really have to be to scale, but I think when we did take our final slide deck to the medical device companies, they appreciated that we had an engineer on board. So the way there's a couple types of prototypes you have to be aware of. The first prototype, which is what most people will and can come up with, is a structural prototype. A structural prototype is actually just a physical model. You just take a lot of stuff, you glue it together, and you're like, this is what I want the final product to look like. It doesn't actually do anything, but I can describe what the different parts can do to make the whole thing work together. A lot of people do use 3D printing these days to develop prototypes. 3D printing, though, just a caveat, is very difficult to do when you have multiple pieces that are made out of different things. We have recently used 3D printing for some of the newer things we're coming up with, but 3D printing can also get very expensive, not because of the model, but the program that you have to write to feed the 3D printer to print out is actually pretty difficult to write. We entertained getting someone on board to do that, but we sort of have drifted away from that model. And the other thing is computer generated. So computer generated models are 3D models that are sort of animated on the computer. So you'll make a figure on the computer that may, like a video that may have a functional sort of approach to your prototype, but it's all in drawings and all in 3D drawings, which you can actually do in CAD and other softwares that my engineer actually uses himself. This is what I got this from Google, but this is what a prototyping lab looks like. When we did our first device, we actually went to Home Depot, Walmart, got a bunch of plastic pieces, drills, hammers, and built a prototype out of just household items. And believe it or not, this is what the big medical device companies do as well. When I did visit Merit, who we have our first deal with, their prototyping lab actually looked like my kitchen. Interestingly enough, over the years, I've been meeting with a lot of their engineers, and one gentleman that we're working on a product with currently said that he actually loves going to toy stores because, believe it or not, simple solutions to complex problems can exist in toys, especially with the toys that are out today in 2019. So, an idea of a structural prototype. So, as you can see from my first slide, this is an existing inflation device that it's one of the market leaders of inflation devices out there that Merit Medical makes. For any of you medical students or residents that have been in the lab, in the procedure room, and have inflated a balloon, know that you have to turn your wrist in sort of a clockwise fashion over and over and over again. I'm sure you guys don't have extensive experience with balloon angioplasty, but people that work in dialysis access centers or a busy cath lab where you're doing a lot of ballooning up to very high pressures in the SVC with really big balloons, you'll realize it does take a tax on your wrist. So one of my co-founders, a co-resident of mine actually, who's a diagnostic radiologist now, he was covering for one of our access centers in residency while we were all interviewing for fellowship. And we happened to be roommates at the time. And this guy's a pretty strong guy, and he, routinely goes to gym. He's a pretty strong guy. And he's like, after one long day at the access center, he's like, my wrist really hurts. This is really not that ergonomic. Maybe we should do something to fix the existing inflation device to take the torque off of the wrist and put it on your elbow where the torque should be. It would take a lot of strain off your arm. So, like I said, structural prototype, the first sort of crank that we put on one of these inflation devices was made out of a pen and a drill bit. So structural prototypes are really made from household items. This prototype actually can um, um, be called a functional prototype because, as you can see, the two uh, sort of points of contact are perpendicular to each other, and this actually did cause rotation of the handle and would inflate a balloon, but it didn't work as well as we'd wanted to. So this leads me to my second point, which is the functional prototype. So a functional prototype is something that can actually get the job done. If you were to hook it up or take it into the OR, the IR suite, the the product would actually function to result in the outcome that you want. Again, this is with raw materials. Doesn't really have to be the scale. I'm going to show you what our one of our final prototypes that our company created, which sort of demonstrates changing the torque and the pressure off the wrist and taking it to the elbow. There's a video that shows one of our final structural prototypes. So again, if we had take this prototype into the lab, I can hook this inflation device up to a balloon and it would inflate. And the final type of prototype is a working prototype. And this is a replica of the final product to scale. And what that means is that the medical device company is going to hit the print button and their molds and their factory is going to start pumping out product that resembles this prototype. Getting a working prototype, again, is very, very, very expensive, especially with molds. Just to change the handle to what I'll show you in a little bit, cost about $2 million to the medical device company in molds. So you can imagine how much the more complicated, more intricate devices cost in developing a working prototype. After you have the prototype and the provisional patent sort of completed, you got to figure out if this works. So even if you've identified an unmet need, you've vetted the Google patent search, you've really done a thorough search, and you've really done your due diligence, and nothing exists to solve the problem. You still have to find out, like, is this really a problem for us? We're like, hey, are we just whiny? Are we just whiners? And we think that it hurts when you turn this inflation device with your wrist. So what you have to do is you have to ask others for feedback. And this is where the provisional patent protects you, because you can actually show your technology, show your idea to others, and not have others take your idea and go do it themselves. When you do show others, you should show mentors first. So I showed all my attendings. I have to plug Dr. Contractor, who was my mentor when I was a medical student. I knew he developed some devices. So I actually showed everyone else first. I took it to him last. He's actually my boss and chair now, and he really gave us the final stamp of approval and said, "Hey, this is actually a pretty good idea." When we took it to doctors everywhere else, I took it to physicians at Mount Sinai, NYU, Cornell, Columbia, lots of private practices in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Friends of mine, we actually asked. We went to a private practice where the techs are actually inflating. So we asked doctors, techs, nurses, and we sort of developed a survey to collect data. Most of the survey was open-ended, which actually was really good. In the sense that we got some good feedback on how to make the handle a little bit different than we had actually originally designed it. And I mean, you may not be able to do this, but once you take your idea to the companies, the medical device companies are going to do this on a much larger scale. They're going to ask, physicians at all the big hospitals, at all the big academic centers, leaders in the field. So they will do it. So if you can't, it's not a big deal. But this is done on a much larger scale by the device companies. And that brings me to licensing. So once you have an idea, you've vetted it out, you think you have you've protected it with your provisional patent. Oh, one last point that I forgot to mention on this slide. If you are in the beginning phases, you're not really sure your patent protects you, you don't really know much about the device realm, you don't have many contacts, the one thing you could do is you could draft a non-disclosure agreement. There's multiple you can get online. You can just Google NDA medical device and you'll get multiple different uh, uh, macros or formats that you can just completely copy, change it to your name or your company's name. Um, and then you can have the people you show your idea sign this. We actually did not go that route. I've consulted some people that I knew that developed devices, and I just didn't want to be. Everyone that I was showing my device to was sort of a mentor of mine or a connection of mine, so I knew that they wouldn't, for lack of a better term, screw me over or try to do something behind my back. Also, I knew I had a connection with a medical device company at this time, so I know that they would protect me. But that is something you can do. You could do non-disclosure agreements. When you go to medical device companies with your idea, they'll actually make you sign a non-disclosure agreement to protect them and you. Which brings me to my next point is, you have all this idea, great, you have a prototype, a lot of people like it. How do you get it out to markets? Well, I mean, you can go down the route, and that biodesign textbook talks about how you can go about testing your product, how you can pay people to really make a working prototype for you. You can test it out in labs overseas. And there's manufacturers and distributors. I mean, if you have a lot of capital and you have a really good idea, for a couple $100,000, you can get people to manufacture and distribute for you as well. And then you can go to one of these companies. But for me, probably most of my listeners and most physicians out there, that's not in the playbook. So you have to reach out to one of these companies. These are just a few of the companies that exist in the interventional radiology endovascular space. You can reach out to anyone in research and development. You can reach out to, believe it or not, your local sales rep who will get you in touch with someone in R&D or someone in the marketing group, and they will give you an NDA. You'll go meet with a bunch of people. For me, like I said, I was lucky enough that my back then mentor, now chair, had a relationship with the Merit Medical Group. He already has and still has a device on the market with them. He directly just called up the leadership and got us a phone call with them right off the bat. Some companies are nice, some not so much. My advice to you would be to reach out to a mentor or someone that has industry relationships and to kind of go that route. I would stick to the medium-sized medical device companies. The big ones don't have time. The small ones don't have the capital, but the medium-sized ones will work well with you and will take the time out to listen to you. There are a lot of companies that actually will do everything for you. There was one company at SIR, I'm actually blanking on the name right now, where if you go to them with an idea, they will have you sign a non-disclosure agreement. They will do the provisional patenting, the prototyping, reaching out to device companies. My company is stepping to that now. We're starting to work with other physicians that have ideas, and we're actually bundling this whole package as well. But with that said, once you get into the door, if your idea is good, the device companies will entertain you. And just to tell you a little bit about my story, they sent over an NDA. My group signed it. Their leadership signed it. We sent over a slide deck. I kept the slide deck out of this talk because it's a little bit more involved. I actually, like I said, I have an engineer who's my chief technological officer who does all the CAD drawings and the prototypings. With the same way, I have a good friend of mine who's in healthcare private equity, who's a chief financial officer of my group, and he actually does all the dealings with the companies and the licensing with the companies, and he's able to really vet out the deal we're going to get. And he was the one that really opened my eyes to the market research, going out and making sure your idea is good. And he was the one that actually developed the deck. And He actually has a really good talk on deck development. It's actually very different than what we're used to as physicians and scientists. We're used to giving talks at meetings and journal clubs where we stick to the format of a published paper where we do an introduction, methods, results, conclusion. It's sort of like that, but it's a little bit different where you start out with market research, valuation, you actually do a market analysis, you identify the market leaders. There's a whole, that's just a whole another talk that I'm sure he'll be happy to give if you guys ever want to hear it. But so we prepared this whole deck to convey our idea, convey the problem, convey our idea, and convey why they would be the right company to work on this. We got onto a call with them. They were really, really excited about uh, the idea because they are the leading company in inflation devices. They are the market leader. They have about 50 to 55% of the market right now. It actually the inflation device um, is about somewhere around 10% of their entire revenue. So they were interested. Next thing I knew, I was on a plane to Utah. I met with, believe it or not, the CEO, who's a very, very nice guy, Fred Lampropoulos, who showed me, gave me the whole grand tour of Merit Medical, showed me their facilities, kind of gave me a lot of advice on how to continue my endeavor. Believe it or not, this started off as a group project in fourth year of medical school, residency, where we had all matched into our fellowships. We were kind of tying up research. A couple of us were interested in medical device and we just wanted to learn something. Next thing we know, I'm on a flight to Utah, meeting with this guy. Um, we delivered our prototype to them. A couple months went by. Fred actually himself flew out to New York City to meet with me and showed me a new working prototype that they had developed. One thing led to another. Uh, we signed a deal where they licensed our provisional patent and gave us some money up front and did a licensing deal with royalties on the back end. One thing I want to tell you guys is I'm sure all of you guys are part of an institution. You have to look at your institutional bylaws when you do this. We looked at our institutional bylaws and it said, if you don't use our resources and you didn't do this while you were at work, it's not really anything. But Merit Medical did make us do our due diligence and had us go and actually really get permission to own the device. Believe it or not, what did we find out? We don't own the device. So the people that were involved with our institution are part of um, the intellectual property did go to them, get transferred to them. So I actually don't own all the device. All of my company does not own all of the intellectual property. So this is something you really need to look through with your institution. This is when my company did get lawyers involved, and I could talk to you about all that offline if you do have any questions. Like I said, afterwards, Fred came to New York, showed me a prototype, a working prototype, and then in a couple of weeks, we had a deal mailed to us. My company, our lawyers, our institutional lawyers, and Merit's lawyers worked together to come up with an agreement that we all thought was fair. And then we signed the deal, and um, a year later, my device is now on the market. Actually, it was just launched in January, and sales begun this first quarter, which just actually ended um, yesterday. So excited to see how we did. I did see. I don't know if any of you went to SIR in their new device display. The inflation device was front and center. They had a couple that were out there. I know a lot of physicians were checking it out. Um, it's like I can't even say it's a dream come true because our goal was not to get a device out on the market. We just wanted to learn how devices were created just because we were all kind of interested in medical devices. We did this as a case study, and now we have a company around it. We are currently sitting on a bunch more IP, some of which is on its way to working prototypes with various companies, and others which we are now actually entertaining developing ourselves, where we um, have a lot of contacts through my chief financial officer with different R&D groups and different overseas medical device guys, and we're actually thinking about maybe taking a step towards going to actually getting the utility patent, filing 501 the 501(k) with the FDA, and really getting a either a really solid functional prototype or something just a couple generations prior to the working prototype. So that's where we are now. I hope you guys learned a little bit about the how to take an idea from a concept to a product, and I hope my story helped you kind of understand the steps of this. Um, it sounds very hard, and it is. I'm not going to say it was easy. It was a lot of hours of work and a lot of luck, a lot of right place, right time, a lot of right connections. But if you're interested in it and you have the work ethic, I think you guys can follow in my footsteps and the footsteps of lots of other physicians. So with that, I'll stop and I'll take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Shukla. That was a lot of wisdom and an incredible story, especially very inspiring that you started this as a case study with your teammates and or your co-residents. And I hope that a lot of the attendees here find your story inspirational as well. So if any attendees have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can type it in the questions box on your console. It looks like we have one saying, congrats on the device and thanks for the talk. What if you just have an idea that addresses an unmet need but no prototype? How can you protect the idea itself?
So you have the idea of a problem, or do you actually have the solution?
It seems like they have the unmet need, they have the solution, just not a prototype yet.
So if you have a solution and it's very difficult to make a prototype, you could start filing the patent first. You could start writing a patent up first. I would get the Biodesign book and read their chapters on patenting before you go to the patent it yourself book, because the patent it yourself book is very detailed. Um, and you could file a provisional patent. With that said, the patent has to have figures. So if you can't make a prototype, but you can draw it out, and you can draw it out in in in, in nauseating detail from every angle, and break it up, break the whole up into parts, and sort of draw the parts in every from every different angle, like you can see in prototype in patents that are similar to yours. You can write up a provisional patent and protect it that way. Um, I do have to say, most people don't go this route. Most people don't even approach companies that'll do this for you. Most people don't pay lawyers to write a patent and don't pay companies to make prototypes for you. What most people do is, the other thing you can do is you can call up a company and say, hey, I have the solution to this problem. They'll send you an NDA and you tell them the solution. Now, I didn't get into this for the purposes of this talk, but there are different types of deals you can get with device companies, and what I like to call different tiers of deals. And I don't really get into this because it's not really written about in literature. This is more of a personal experience of mine, and I've learned this while talking through a lot of people that I've met through the process. So this is not anything you should quote, but um, what I believe and what most people believe is when you do approach a medical device company, there's different tiers of deals you can get. So if you identified a problem and you have a solution and you call up a company and say, hey, I think we can fix this, um, they will take you on as a consultant. So that is the basic level of a deal you'll get with the medical device company. Well, they'll give you a little bit of money um, after you sign the NDA. They will own all the IP. Some companies may put your name on the IP, but only if you actually have a provisional patent with figures. I mean, they don't have to be detailed figures, but there's something that protects your idea. But like I said, the baseline thing is they'll give you a little bit of money, and every time they have to call you to ask you a question until it's developed, they'll pay you quarterly, which can be like anywhere from like it could be like anywhere from a couple grand to tens of grands. That's the basic level. Now you have a provisional patent. There you get a little bit more deal, a little bit better deal, because what they have to actually do is they have to license your provisional patent to file a new provisional with all the changes that they make. If you have a provisional patent and you have a structural prototype, which is a model, that gives you a little bit more of a feet to stand on, because now you have a model. We had a provisional patent and actually a functional prototype, which actually gives you even more credibility, because you showed that this actually functions. And actually, my functional prototypes and working prototypes, it's a spectrum. So my prototype could actually, if you sterilized it, would have worked in a laboratory setting. So you could say that my prototype was an early working prototype. So the better the prototype that you have, the better the deal you're going to get. Now, if you go from filing a provisional to the utility patent, that's the big jump. When you have a utility patent, whether or not you have a prototype, utility patents are worth a lot. But like I said, a utility patent, unless you know a lawyer, is going to be like, I mean, when I say know a lawyer, I mean like your brother or your father is a patent lawyer. It's going to be very expensive, and the low end of patent attorneys will charge you around $50,000. That's not just for filing the patent, which cost about 10. It's for the writing time. Lawyers are very expensive. To put into perspective, I don't know how much you've dealt with lawyers, but when we were sort of going through the deal, lawyers will charge you for every single minute that they work, and I'm actually not exaggerating. When they send you an invoice for a phone call, it'll say they spoke to you for 7 minutes, and their minimum charge is 50. They charge, let's say they charge $500 an hour. They're going to charge you for 15 minutes. A fourth of $500. If they write you an email, which says thanks, which takes about 30 seconds, they're not going to charge you. But if they spend 3 minutes on an email, that's going to go into the invoice. So you can imagine, every time they have a question, every time they want to go over something, if they want to meet you, that's even more. It can get very, very, very expensive. But if you do have the resources, you think you have a slam dunk idea, you file a provisional yourself, you do some market research, and people are like, oh man, that's a really good idea. You can raise money and file the utility. I would say if you do want to protect it, yeah, definitely go file that provisional. The other thing you can do, there's companies like mine that are sort of later in, or I should say further along than where we are, later in the development of the company than where we are, where they have a couple devices out on the market. They will package everything for you. They will do some companies will charge you, like X grand, which will be in the tens of or hundreds of thousands of dollars to do, like, again, different level stuff. And other companies will say, well, hey, like, it's you have a good idea, for 50% equity in this idea, we will handle everything for you. We will go all the way to either provisional or utility patent to a really good prototype. We are just starting to work with doctors right now. We have a couple projects right now that we are entertaining taking on, because a lot of my friends have approached me with ideas. The way this becomes very dicey, though, is like I said, especially if you're a student asking this question, if you have an idea right now, your school owns your idea. So they own you. So if you file a provisional patent, you don't own any of that. So the first thing I would do is make sure you look at all the bylaws of your school or your residency program. And like I said, I can talk to you a little bit more of that offline, because I did get into a lot of not legal battle, but that's a little stressful. But I can talk to you about that offline if you have questions about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And a follow-up question to that. Any resources that helped you navigate dealing with a company or negotiating with them?
So there's a couple references I have. It's from my CFO who actually works for a healthcare equity, private equity firm. What I would say is uh, don't try to develop those relationships yourself. And this is from personal experience and from talking to a lot of my friends that are kind of dabbing in this space now. I would reach out to, if you have a mentor who's um, that you know that already has relationships with device companies, I would go to them. If not, like for you guys, it's tough because I know all my local sales reps, I know all my local regional managers, so I can kind of go to them and be like, hey, can you get me in with your R&D guy? Um, the other thing is so that's going bottom up. I can also go top down because my chief financial officer knows the CEOs of almost every company, or at least someone, a few degrees of separation away from the R&D guys. I would say if you do, before you approach a company, approach someone that already has relationships. You can email a company all you want; they're never going to get back to you. With one of our ideas, we tried to reach out because if you actually go to like, for example, Medtronic has have an idea, submit like your name, email here, never got back to us. A lot of companies now have social media presence. We tried to reach out to them as well. Even going bottom up, top down is really hard. So I would say don't tackle this on your own. Use resources and people you know to get to companies.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And for the sake of time, just one last question, which I think is applicable to everybody. Um, Here is a question on if you would mind elaborating on your experiences or any advice regarding finding a mentor, specifically, it looks like concerns for the ability to bring it to market or take off with the idea without you.
So again, my situation is very unique because my mentor was sort of in this space. The one thing, I mean, I haven't had to deal with trust issues, but I actually know, again, and I'd rather talk about this offline, is I've known a lot of people um, who have personal experiences where their trust was violated. And I have one particular knowledge of one particular instance where it was a mentor-mentee thing, and then years later that uh, the idea ended up on the market, and I mean, again, nothing happened, but essentially, you know, the the relationship was the trust was violated, in my opinion. Finding a mentor, I mean, people in your institution, I'm sure you guys are all applying to either interventional radiology, diagnostic radiology, or vascular surgery, or whatever you guys might be applying to. You need a mentor for that anyway. Try to go to them. A lot of them, even if they don't have uh, deal like any sort of deal, or they're not into device development, they do have relationships. Just because of the nature of the of our field, you have to have relationships with these companies just to get your procedures done. Um, you can call me, you can email me anytime you want. If you want to discuss stuff, my company will send you over an NDA. With that said, we are not currently working with trainees, students, and residents. Um, because of the whole school issue, we haven't figured that out yet. I'm actually in the process of um, I'm going to travel to Emory in the upcoming months and sort of figure that out. How to deal with different institutions. Like I said, I'll talk about that offline as well. You can call me and like any sort of if you want me to take you to a device company, I'll do that. I'll introduce you guys via email. The only thing is like I wouldn't be able to vet your idea. I could vet it through NDAs and stuff. Um, but that becomes a little dicey, and I would just have to know that you guys have all done your due diligence. Like I said, unless you just have an idea and you just want to take it to them, that I can link you guys up right away. But I mean, actually, writing the patent took us hundreds of hours for our first patent. Uh, me and my co-resident started writing different sections, and then rewrote sections, and then rewrote sections, and then rewrote sections, and then we actually got help from a lawyer who helped us rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. So it took maybe, I would say, about 100 hours to write it. So if you do want to go through that process, um, I mean, we will set you up an NDA with my company, and I can give you advice. And I can definitely link you up. I have a bunch of connects. So if you just want to get a connect in, I can definitely do that. But I want to make sure that you guys, definitely put in the time and do the due diligence needed to approach a company. Because the one thing, again, like I didn't dwell on like the the presentation to the company, because like I said, that could be a talk in itself. But I was lucky enough to have a friend who um, does this every day, and he actually stressed like the fact that we had to dot all our T's, um, dot our I's, cross our T's before we present it to a company, because you really just can't waste their time, because then they'll never talk to you again. But yeah, with that said, if you need help, you can definitely call me or email me, um, and I can help you out. But the first place to start would be a mentor at your institution that going to write you a letter or whatnot. The other thing you can do is you can reach out to the Biodesign group at Stanford or at Emory. Those guys are phenomenal. One of my friends was a biodesign fellow when we were doing this, so I actually had called him, and he linked me up with some biodesign folks that really helped me out. So you can reach out to anybody at Biodesign, either Emory or Stanford. The one thing I want to say is, like, don't be worried about, especially in academia, people stealing your ideas and stuff. Like, yeah, there are stories out there, but the one thing I learned through this whole process is there are a lot of people out there willing to help you. And that was actually like the craziest. Like, there were CEOs that got on the phone with us and would chat with us for 30 minutes. I mean, these are really, really busy guys that would take time out of their busy day, busy schedule to come to talk to us. Just to put it in perspective, there's some stuff we're dabbing in. And an SIR, I met with the CEO of Penumbra, who took 30 minutes out to talk to, Joe Schmo, interventional radiologist from Jersey. So people are out there to help.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much for your time and experiences and your learnings. I hope we all have learned something today. I certainly have learned a lot. And congratulations to you, Dr. Shukla, on your company and how well it's going. Um, for the sake of time, unfortunately, we have to end the webinar, but it sounds like Dr. Shukla is very open to talking with all of you offline. So with that, I'd like to close and thank everyone for listening in and thanking Dr. Shukla for taking time out of his very busy career to teach us. So thank
Yeah.
you.
And I'll respond with my email there. So if you guys do want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me on that email if you have any more questions. Thanks, Jess, for holding this webinar and for giving me the invitation.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.